Okay, welcome. So we're going to talk about risk. The best definition for risk for our purposes is possible problems. Now, you'll get possible problems at the event, obviously, but you'll also have lots and lots of possible problems leading up to the event. And that's part of project risk management. So project risk management looks at risk to the project, in other words, getting the whole thing together, plus looking at risks at the event. You'll have a whole course on risks at the event and things like compliance and occupational health and safety and those sort of issues. That's not what I'll be talking about. I'm talking about the other types of risk, possible problems. And we'll be using the ISO 31000. If you're not familiar with that, this is the International Standards Organization. And it's the one that's used all around the world, not so much in America. There's another one there. We'll talk about that later. But if you're going to work in Dubai or any of the places where I've worked, for example, the 31000 is a good document to use because most companies, IBM, Amazon, all of them use the ISO 31000. So you're talking their language, and it works quite well for events once you understand it, and hopefully you'll understand it by the end of this course. So the question is, where do you get all the information for it? Well, there they all are. These are books that I've written or contributed to in the last couple of years, last 2 years, 3 years. And the main one is that risk management for events. That's the main core textbook, if you like, although you don't need it. But it's good to have a look at it because it gives you definitions. The other one's the one on the left, crisis management and recovery. That's quite interesting because it's sort of more an academic approach to crisis management and how events are going to recover. I've got a chapter in there on that has to do with COVID. And the one on the right, top right, crowd management, that looks at a specific type of risk that has to do with crowds. And needless to say, that's the big one. When you've got people involved, that's your biggest risk because it can involve criminal charges and many, many things. Down the bottom left is one you can get for free off our website, the Google site that you've got for this course. I put it up there, Safe and Healthy Crowded Places. It actually has an excellent chapter, 2 chapters, I think, on risk management, the sort of things that we're going through now. So you won't have any excuse for not knowing the words and terminology. It's all in that safe and healthy crowded places. I wrote that one in 2018. It's the standard over here for crowded places, not just events, but also anything that has to do with crowds, like shopping centres and railways and things like that. Down the bottom right-hand corner is a dictionary. So if you don't understand some of the terms, it's sort of an academic dictionary, so they're more concerned with event studies rather than actually managing the event. But Don Getz, the commissioning editor of it, editor-in-chief, is really, really good. I contributed about 300 definitions to this. So you'll find quite a lot of the words that I use will actually be in that dictionary. Okay, they've all come, I think 1, 2, 3 of them came out in 2021, so they're very current. One came out in 2020, and the Safe and Healthy Crowded Places came out in 2018. So let's get back to risk. Okay. So have a look at this. This is the duck walking along across the street with her ducklings. And as you can see, the ducklings have suddenly disappeared. I have actually seen this happen, not with ducks, but with other types of birds. And the big question here is the mother duck to blame? Is it her fault? So don't just react to it. Have a think about it. Is it her fault? Okay, so everything in risk management has to do with what's called foreseeability. Now, it's not probably an easy term to translate, but it means that could that risk been foreseen, in other words, forecasted, or by the average person in the event sector. Okay. So they use the standard in the event sector to see whether a risk could be foreseeable. And if it couldn't be foreseeable, then you won't get to be blamed for it. But if it's foreseeable as a standard in the event sector, then you're in a lot of trouble if something happens. So we'll go through this, so don't worry, we'll go through it all so that you'll understand it. And once again, I recommend any of those books, which will explain it all. So basically, when you're putting on an event, it wouldn't occur without you putting the event on, organising the event. Therefore, who's responsible for the risk? Well, it's you. And that's very important. You have this, what's called duty of care to the people that are there. And there's a lot of things that could go wrong long before the event itself that could surface during the event. That, by the way, is called upstream risk. So a quick review of what we're up to. We've done the 5 phases of event management. Remember, initiation, planning, implementation, the event, and then the shutdown. We've hopefully done a definition of event stakeholder, so you've got that. We've looked at work breakdown structure. This is an extremely important term. There is no way you can run an event without breaking the work down into manageable units. Not a lot of event managers use that term. That doesn't matter. They use the technique or the process. There is no doubt about it. How that's used, we've gone through that. We've looked at the scope of the event, and we've looked at scope of work. The scope of the event is the size of the event, how many people, how long it goes for, right? Now, the scope of work is the amount of work that you need to do to deliver that event and shut it down. So they're 2 different things, but they're highly related. Now, here's an example of an event. This is in Saudi Arabia. And what you see here is a lot of young men. They're all about the same age group. And what they do is race those cars up the side of these sand dunes. This is a sand dune that we're sitting on here. And what happens is that when they do race the cars up, sometimes the cars will stop and they'll tumble over, and sometimes they'll tumble into the audience, okay? Which case people get killed. So that's a big risk. There's a lot of other risks with this event, by the way, not just that. But one risk that they don't have is alcohol. Well, at least at that time. Alcohol is haram, forbidden. And so aspects of the event that have to do with alcohol are just not there. As distinct from this event, and this event happens in Australia. And what you can see here is a group of men and women, all about the same age group as these guys, but there's no women at this event. You can see that they're drinking by the look of the pile of stuff there. They're already into it. And this is a car event as well, as you can see around. Okay, it's called the Denny Ute Muster. Why am I showing you all this? Well, this is to show the variety of events that there are, and some risks are common to different types of events. So if you're going to go into the event sector, particularly if you're going to work for yourself, which I'd highly recommend, if you're going to go into the event sector and be self-employed or start your own business, you'll be doing all kinds of events. And that's really what makes it so exciting. So let's have a look through some of the risks here. Now, what's happened over the last few years is what we've seen is an enormous explosion, if you like, of crowd management companies, okay? Risk and crowd management. In the last maybe 8 to 10 years, the number of risk and crowd management companies around the world is huge. It's huge. And they're getting their act together. Now, this was from a few years back, about 9 years back or 8 years back. And what they started off doing was listing all the things that had gone wrong in events. And it's quite interesting. They had no trouble finding things that had gone wrong at events. So we'll have a look at just a few very quickly, no big deal, okay? So events can collapse like the Superfest. collapsed because of that. They banned smoking at music festivals. See, back in 2013. All right, you've got ambush marketing is an issue at these events. So we're going back through history here. There's one you never thought of. Bacteria in water. So they had to cancel that event. Right? There's a swimming event in Scotland. Okay, this is an event that was an exhibition, and the bodies were real bodies, actually preserved cadavers, so they had to stop that exhibition. Trade shows that don't work because the exhibitors, there's not enough people that come to them. Okay. State Fair, this was a very famous one because what happened was that the stage collapsed. If I've got time, I'll show you that. Okay, music festivals go bust. It's quite common because you're based on ticket sales. Right? Insurance suddenly became very expensive. How about that? And this happened 10 years ago when it started. Now, here's one for you guys in France, northeastern France, the medieval festival, and somebody robbed it of 20,000 euros. Okay, overcrowding at events. You're getting too many people. People are unpaid. Now, we'll go through a few of these. If we've got time, we'll go through a few of these. There's some really interesting ones. Okay, so what we've got here now is the actual definition of risk management. Okay, so I'll read it to you because it's important that you understand it. Is the term applied to a logical and systematic, you've got it, that's important, method of establishing the context, and we'll look at that, identifying the risks, analysing the risks, evaluating them, treating them, in other words, trying to minimise the impact of them, monitoring, making sure that it's still working, and communicating risks associated with any type activity, function, or process in a way that enables the organisation, in other words, the event team or the sponsors, to minimise losses. And here's this, maximise opportunity. So when we go through the risk, you'll actually find that there's a lot of opportunities there as well. So keep that in mind. So that's quite a good definition of risk management. It comes from the original standard in risk management. So logical and systematic, that's the very important. And that process, context, identify, analyze, evaluate, treat, monitor, and communicate may sound a little bit complex to you, but you'll see it's what you do every day. You know, you're really what I'm pointing out, as with the work breakdown structure, is something that you're very familiar with and you'll have no trouble with once you actually understand how that's applied. So for every event now, you really have to put together a risk management plan. There's no way out of it. It's become de rigueur, the standard for events almost everywhere. So that's what we're going to go through. How you put together the risk management plan as part of your project plan. It's not an extra thing that you have to do. It's something part of the project plan. So when you come up with, like, for our project, which is the event proposal, you would also have to put, as part of that event proposal, a risk management plan, and we will go through that. Where it's come from was that the original way of doing events, and there's still a few people who do this, was that basically you were the event manager and you got pressured by the client, the sponsors and all the rest of them to do the risk management, and all you did was took out insurance and you thought, well, that's it. Okay. Then what you did, and this still happens quite a lot and it doesn't work, is transfer liability. In other words, you'd say to the venue, if anything happens in the venue, it's your fault, not mine. If anything happens with the audio visual or the stalls, then it's the fault of the contractors, not mine. And if you come to my event and anything happens to you, it's your fault, not mine. Okay, now that's the old way of thinking. That's changed dramatically over the last 5 to 10 years. And what happens now is the new model. And this is part of ISO 31000. And basically it says Everyone, if something goes wrong, everyone is at fault. Now prove that you are not at fault, which is the opposite of the legal system, by the way, innocent until guilty. This is the other way around. This is how it works now. Now, how do you do that? Well, you do that through consultation. Okay, so you have this duty of care to everybody at your event, not just the attendees, by the way, to the staff and volunteers, to everybody who's on that event site. Why? Because you created the event. Right? Without you, the event wouldn't be there. So you created it, therefore you have the duty of care to all the people that are on that event site and all the people at your project office when you're putting together the event, when you're planning the event. So you have this duty of care. And it means that you must consult. Now, I'm sure Paul will go through this with regard to risk management in great detail, so I won't go into too much detail. But basically, it's about consultation. You must consult with people. You must ask them. And you must get a definition of consultation. And as I've said at the very start, you've got to get those definitions. You can't go through this course without definition of terms. You can't assume that you know, because believe me, you don't. So here's one definition. So it means when you're working with employees or volunteers, you've got to give them relevant information so that they can express their views. Okay, and then you've got to show those views are valued and taken into account by your risk management plan. And we'll do this soon. You'll be setting out a risk management plan. Everybody here, everywhere, coroner's court. Coroner's court is where if anyone dies or is killed or whatever at your event, it goes to a special court called the coroner's court where they investigate the death, right? And all of these, and if you go and have a look at these, the inquest it's called, and if you go and have a look at those, and often they're online, you can get them through the government websites, and very important, because you get stuck in something like that and it can take 10 years for you to go through it. I'll show you that. Well, here's a good example of it. So this happened a few years ago, but it's very instructive. And what happened here was that, as you can read, okay, so 57 people have died. They were killed when the boat, a dhow, and that's the sort of boat that they have in this case, it's in Qatar. Bahrain, sorry, in Bahrain in the Middle East. And they were celebrating the end of construction of the building, which I've seen actually in Bahrain. The World Trade Center has big windmills in the middle of it to generate power, which actually doesn't work. But either way, it looks good. 57 people died. And what happened was that the boat, everyone went on to the party. As you can see, they had a party to celebrate. And the boat tipped over. And the people were trapped underneath and drowned. Now, the big question, this went to court, big time, this is big time. One reason it was big time was that it was international. There were people from many different countries here. So when something like that happens at your event, believe me, it's big time. You go to quite a few courts, actually. Anyway, your question then, who was to blame? Okay, where was the fault? Who do you think they blamed? Who do you think they thought they blamed? We'll just do a draft. Just come up with a list of people that would be blamed for this. Okay, so who was to blame? Well, here's what everybody's said so far. The event manager was to blame. The company, the construction company. Remember, whoever's to blame could go to jail. So this is important. It's not like a game. Captain of the boat, the Coast Guard, the manufacturer of the boat, the marina itself, the boat owner, the passengers, maybe that was the passengers' fault, the weather, the fish. In other words, what will happen is everybody will come up with somebody else to blame, not them, right? And no one. Okay, so what actually happened, and this court case went on for many, many years. It's not even resolved now, by the way. It went to the International Court in The Hague. Basically, what happens is that everyone blames everybody else. You know, the event company blames the captain blames the owner of the dhow owner blames the builder of the dhow. You know, it wasn't built to specifications. The dhow builder says, well, we built it to specifications, so it was the licensing body who allowed our boat to go is to blame. The licensing body blamed the government because they were told to do certain things by the government. And I can tell you now, the government will never blame itself. So the government then went to the event company and blamed the event company. And the whole thing went on and on and on through the courts in Bahrain and then to the international courts. Now, what you've got to do, and what they didn't do, because it was an event, even though these are construction people who are pretty good at project management, risk management, because it was an event, they didn't do a risk management plan for the event. Now, if they had, then that risk management plan may have uncovered this sort of situation, who knows? But either way, it would have protected the event company because that's the standard in the industry. And the rest of those people would have had to argue it out. And the risk management plan would have stood in for the event company. And that's how important it is, what we're going to do. So what I'm going to do is give you a little exercise now.